अनुराधा जी, सैयद मलिक साहब, प्रबोध जामवाल जी, Comrade Sethi, friends, it's honestly a great honor for me to be invited to deliver this first memorial lecture in honor of Ved Bhasin ji, an editor and journalist that I admire greatly. मेरी उनसे पहली मुलाकात शायद 90 के दशक में न्यूयॉर्क में हुआ था, जब मैं उन दिनों कोलंबिया यूनिवर्सिटी में पढ़ता था। और वही दिन थे जब जम्मू कश्मीर में मिलिटेंसी और ह्यूमन राइट्स वायलेशंस एक पीक पे थे। और जाहिर है कि अमेरिका में जो हिंदुस्तान से विद्यार्थी वहाँ पे पढ़ रहे थे और जो हिंदुस्तानियों की जो कम्युनिटी थी वहाँ पे चिंतित थे कि भाई JNK में हो क्या रहा है। और जाहिर है कि अगर आप हिंदुस्तानियों से बात करें और हिंदुस्तान के अलग अलग सूबों के लोगों से बात करें और कश्मीर के अंदर जो लोग हैं उनसे बात करें, विचारों की कमी नहीं थी। अलग अलग ख्याल थे लोगों के और उन विचारों और ख्यालों को लेके आमतौर पे लड़ाई झगड़े भी होते थे, बहस होती थी। भसीन साहब से हम लोगों ने ये सीखा कि आपके अपने सियासी सोच, आपके अपनी विचारधारात्मक जो एक आइडिया है, आपकी जो अपनी सोच है, वो अपनी जगह में ठीक है और इस पे बहस होनी चाहिए। लेकिन अगर हम कश्मीर के मसले के बारे में बात करें तो कुछ चीजों को मरकज बना के हमको आगे बढ़ना चाहिए। और खास तवज्जो उन्होंने इंसानी हुकूक पे दिया कि कश्मीर हिंदुस्तान का अटूट अंग है, नहीं है। कोई कहता आजाद होना चाहिए, कोई कुछ करे। मिलजुल के हम बात कर लें, इस पर बहस कर लें, 370 होना चाहिए, नहीं होना चाहिए। लेकिन हिंदुस्तान के आईन के मुताबिक जो इंसानी हुकूक हर शहरी को मिलने चाहिए, उन राइट्स को अगर हम सेंटर स्टेज पे डाल के पॉलिसीज के बारे में बात करें तो ज्यादा बेहतर होगा। और इस चीज इंसानी हुकूक को अगर हम एक तरह से एक पॉइंट ऑफ कन्वर्जेंस बनाएं, जिसमें बहस नहीं होनी चाहिए, जिसमें डिवीजन या डिफरेंस ऑफ ओपिनियन नहीं होनी चाहिए, क्योंकि कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन के तहत जो राइट्स गारंटीड है सिटीजन्स के लिए, ये मांग करना कि उन हुकूक, वो ह्यूमन राइट्स जो है, जो मानव अधिकार हैं, पूरी तरह से इनको रिस्पेक्ट मिलना चाहिए, ये कभी भी किसी डेमोक्रेसी के अंदर एक पॉलिटिकल पॉइंट ऑफ डिवीजन नहीं होना चाहिए। उनका ये मौकफ उन दिनों मुझे लगता है कि एक तरह से काफी बहादुरी का उनका स्टैंड था। आमतौर पे उन दिनों, आज भी शायद, जो लोग इंसानी हुकूक की बात करते हैं, बड़ी आसानी से उन पे तरह तरह के इल्जाम लगाए जाते हैं। लेकिन वसीम साहब अपने मौक़िफ़ से पीछे नहीं हटे और अलग अलग लोगों से वो बात बहस करते थे, कन्विंस करने की कोशिश करते थे, लेकिन अपने प्रिंसिपल स्टैंड से और खास तौर पे अपने जर्नलिज्म से पीछे नहीं हटे। तो ऐसे सहाफी के नाम पे अगर मेमोरियल लेक्चर स्थापित किया जाए और अनुराधा जी 1 या 2 दिन का भी नोटिस देते हैं, तो हाँ, रजामंदी देने के लिए और एक्सेप्ट करने के लिए मुझे लगता है कि मैं कम से कम देरी नहीं कर पाता। टॉपिक जो अनुराधा जी और हमने मिलके तय किया वो ये, क्योंकि भसीन साहब थे सहाफ़ी और मैं भी जर्नलिस्ट हूँ, और जर्नलिज्म एक ऐसा टॉपिक है जो एक तरह से देश के सामने जो सबसे बड़े, सारे बड़े सवाल हैं, जर्नलिज्म पूरी तरह से उन सवालों से जूझता रहता है। और मुझे लगता है कि कोई ऐसी समस्या नहीं है, कोई ऐसा मसला नहीं है देश के अंदर जिसका कनेक्शन, अच्छा या बुरा, जर्नलिज्म सहाफियत से ना हो। तो मेरा मानना है कि challenges and opportunities of the media is a very fitting topic for the subject of this first memorial lecture for Ved Bhasin ji. And what I will try to do is to talk about the importance of journalism, identify what are the stress points, what are the various crises that are emerging within Indian journalism, and try to connect it to some of the political and institutional challenges that India as a society, India as a country, India as a nation state is confronting today. At a time when there is no opposition to speak of, within Parliament or outside, when a reconfiguration of power is being effected between the executive and the judiciary, and when all kinds of regressive social and political forces are making their presence felt, India needs fearless, objective, professional journalism. There are many individual journalists whose work tells us a great deal about what is happening behind the veil, behind the facade of incredible India, behind the parda of India shining and Achhe Din. But the Indian media ecosystem and Indian journalism as a whole is today mired in deep crisis. At a time when the people of India most need its assertiveness and independence, the media has lost its moorings. It has lost its anchor in the public interest it is meant to serve and is drifting aimlessly, buffeted by the fickle headwinds of a business and governance model that prefers risk aversion, trivia, entertainment, gladiatorial contests, and opinion mongering in the guise of news to actual in-depth objective reporting, analysis and commentary. The fact that this business and governance model is itself coming under strain and showing signs of breaking down is only adding to the pressure on good journalism. This is of course not a problem that is confined to India alone. Dean Starkman, a couple of years ago, published a critique of American journalism's failure to predict the 2008 financial crisis and called his book The Watchdog That Didn't Bark. Let's see what he says. To read various, and I quote now from him, to read various journalistic accounts of mortgage lending and Wall Street during the bubble is to come away with radically differing representations of the soundness of the US financial system. It all depended on what you were reading. Anyone paying attention to the conventional business press could be forgiven for thinking that things were, in the end, basically normal. Yes, there was a housing bubble. Any fair reading of the press of the time makes this clear, even if warnings were mitigated by just as loud celebrations of the boom. And yes, the press did say that there were a lot of terrible mortgage products out there. Those are important consumer and investor issues, but that's all they are. When the gaze turned to financial institutions and their basic ill health, the message was entirely different, all clear. It's not just the puff pieces or the language that sometimes lapses into toadying. It's even the stories that were ostensibly critical of individual Wall Street firms, which describe them in terms of their competition with one another. Would their earnings be okay, was the question that these journalists like to ask. And Starkman concludes, there was a bubble all right. The problem is that the business press was inside that bubble. Stark notes that the odd critical story of what was happening on Wall Street did run in Forbes or the Wall Street Journal, but these never became central to the business press's perception of what was actually going on and were never followed up. Turning to India, in the face of persistent warning signs of what lies ahead on the social, cultural, political, environmental and economic front, as the NDA government at the centre gets down to business, now about to enter its third year, the Indian watchdog, our press and television, is not just failing to bark, it is busy wagging its tail. A bubble may not be the best way to describe the hothouse of adulation that has been built up around the cult of the Prime Minister, Narendra Modi, but the national media is very much in it. The kind of questions that need to be asked of our political leadership and political parties are not being asked. And it is in this void that all kinds of new and dangerous developments are taking place. The re-emergence, for example, of Article 356 as an instrument for destabilizing the constitutional equilibrium between the centre and the states, a problem we had all assumed had gone away because of the Bombay judgment. The tussle between the executive and the judiciary, manifested most recently in the tears that were shed by the Chief Justice. The systematic attack on the autonomy of educational and cultural institutions. The strengthening of the cage which holds supposedly free parrots like the Central Bureau of Investigation and the National Investigation Agency and so on. It is this challenge posed by the media's silence on these issues, or the media's unwillingness to really go after these stories, that I hope to describe and analyze in my lecture today. Before I describe the present, it is worth remembering that the sins of the media that we see in front of us have a hoary past. In a remarkable lecture delivered in 1943 on the occasion of the 101st birth anniversary of the social reformer M.G. Ranade, Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar had this to say about the press in India. And you'll have to pinch yourself when I read this extract and remind yourself that he's talking about 1943. Journalism in India, this is Ambedkar's words, journalism in India was once a profession. It has now become a trade. It is no more moral, it has no more moral function than the manufacture of soap. It does not regard itself as the responsible advisor of the public. To give the news uncolored by any motive, to present a certain view of public policy which it believes to be for the good of the community, to correct and chastise without fear all those, no matter how high, who have chosen a wrong or a barren path, is not regarded by journalism in India as its first or foremost duty. Instead, to accept a hero and worship him has become its principal duty. Under it, news gives place to sensation, reasoned opinion to unreasoning passion. Appeal to the minds of responsible people gives way to appeal to the emotions of the irresponsible. What Lord Salisbury spoke of the Northcliffe journalism as written by office boys for office boys. Indian journalism is all that plus something more. It is written by drum boys to glorify their heroes. Never has the interest of country been sacrificed so senselessly for the propagation of hero worship. Never has hero worship become so blind as we see it in India today. There are, I am glad to say, honorable exceptions, but they are too few and their voice is never heard. 1943. Ambedkar was speaking, of course, about Gandhi and Jinnah. Those were the heroes he referred to. But his words have a familiar echo, don't they? He then went on to make another prescient point. In establishing their supremacy, these leaders have taken the aid of big business and money magnates. For the first time in our country, money is taking the field as an organized power. For in these days, with the press in hand, it is easy to manufacture great men. In the past 3 decades, ladies and gentlemen, we have seen the media lionize one leader after the other. 1984, you remember the huge emotional support that we saw in the media for Rajiv Gandhi. Then we had Narasimha Rao. Then we had Atal Bihari Vajpayee. Then Manmohan Singh. P. Chidambaram. Almost always, because they represented at various points in time the hopes and aspirations of the rich and privileged. Now let us consider the most recent case of what Baba Saheb Ambedkar would consider manufactured greatness. Narendra Modi is where he is today, not just because he was a more capable contender for the post of Prime Minister than the inexperienced Rahul Gandhi, or only because voters were fed up, as they should have been, with the corruption and inefficiencies of the United Progressive Alliance government, but because his capabilities were the subject of a relentless and well-funded marketing campaign that got off the ground as early as 2010. This campaign was fueled by the impatience of the corporate sector for a return to the Achhe Din of rent seeking, the process of earning super profits from favorable allocations of spectrum, coal, land, etc., which the weak and indecisive government of Manmohan Singh was incapable of defending in the face of an independent judiciary and an assertive Comptroller and Auditor General. It is an open secret that the corporate sector deserted the ruling Congress and started pouring money into the Modi campaign. Indications are that the amount spent in the 2014 Lok Sabha election runs to a figure at least 10 times higher than in the election which preceded it 5 years earlier. One estimate pegs the BJP's advertising spend across all India, including hoardings, at a staggering rupees 5,000 crore. That is just a little bit less than the roughly $1 billion that the Obama campaign spent under all heads in the 2012 US presidential election. Now, what about expenditure limits, you might ask? Well, you might ask the question, but the media didn't. Another case of the watchdog that didn't bark. For the 2014 election was a reminder of the one big loophole in India's election rules designed to favor parties backed by the rich. While there is a limit on what individual candidates may spend, and currently that limit is either rupees 54 lakh or rupees 70 lakh, depending on which state or constituency a candidate happens to contest from, there is actually no limit to what political parties may spend in the course of an election campaign. The only limits are on the candidate's expenditure. In Britain, whose election system India broadly follows, there is a cap on both the individual candidate's expenditure and his or her party's. It would be naive on our part to believe the deployment of money on the scale it has been would not have had an impact on the election result and on the policies of the government, which is elected on the basis of financial support from the richest Indians of this magnitude. In the Amarnath Chawla case, the Supreme Court in 1974 recognized the principle that election expenditure must be limited in order to ensure equality between candidates and to eliminate as far as possible the influence of big money in the electoral process. Though it did not set a limit, it ruled that some limitative ruling on expenditure for general party propaganda during elections is eminently desirable. And it's been more than 4 decades since that ruling of the Supreme Court. There is no sign of any attempt by any political party to introduce expenditure limits for political parties. The court had observed then that if election expenditure were not limited, political parties would go all out for collecting contributions, and obviously the largest contributions would be from the rich and affluent, who constitute but a fraction of the electorate. And this is the Supreme Court's own words. The pernicious influence of big money would then play a decisive role in controlling the democratic process of the country, quote, unquote. This is precisely what is happening with the corporate sector now fully into the act, making both open and hidden contributions. In a story that was barely reported and certainly not followed up, the Delhi High Court in April 2014, in the midst of the election campaign, found that both the Congress and the BJP had been guilty of illegally accepting money from the UK-based firm Vedanta. The response of the BJP, of the Modi government, to this judgment was not to apologize and ensure that the BJP and all parties will henceforth obey the law, but to smuggle in to the recent finance bill a change in the Foreign Contributions Regulation Act, which will redefine the